Tonight we have a talk by Dr. Alan H. Karp, Ph.D., and its title is SitePassword, a different kind of password manager. And we are the SFA ACM. We were founded in 1957 in order to promote knowledge about computing, and we aim to create communities, support interpersonal networking, and hiring. So at our events, we often ask if there are hiring managers or people who have openings, and if so, then they can raise their hand and talk about them. We have a annual membership, which is a mere $20. Even though our talks are free, it helps us a great deal for people to join, of course, and pay that $20 pretty nominal annual membership fee. We have a meetup channel, which you see there, meetup.com, SFA ACM. We have a bunch of talks over the past couple decades that are stored up on YouTube. We generally have two monthly meetings. One is a general computing meeting, and the other is on data science. And again, at our meetings, we try to do interpersonal networking and job hiring announcements. And sometimes we do joint meetings with the IEEE and other societies. Some upcoming talks. On February 15, we have a talk titled Intra Verified ID, a cheap, faster, and more trustworthy ID for remote employees. In the future, we will have Saving Lives, Cosmo generating synthetic images for Foghorn DL training, and drug discovery using AlphaFold neural networks and docking algorithms, which is a talk that we've had in the past, but this is a continuation of the research and an update of it. And more talks are being scheduled. So again, keep an eye on our meetup page for that. We, for the last few years, have been judging at the Santa Clara Science and Engineering Fair, which is a large event. It's held at the San Jose Convention Center with over 1,000 students from across the county participating. And they do some pretty high level things. For example, that talk, Drug Discovery Using AlphaFold Neural Networks and Docking Algorithms, that was a student project at the science fair. Another one was cardiovascular disease diagnosis, and yet another one was an algorithm to determine eligibility for genetic screening of breast cancer. So we need to have about 20 judges so that we can sort out which of those 1,000 or more projects are actually using computer science in some fashion, and we can evaluate them. So if you are interested in that, please contact us, and we would be happy to talk to you about that and have you come down there with us and help judge. We are a volunteer-run organization. We need volunteers for many things. Membership services is one of them. We have a membership database. We have publicity and marketing and various other aspects of running an organization. In Zoom, you can use either chat or Q&A. And as the moderator, I'll try to bring up those questions. And if you want to make announcements about jobs or other events, you can do that through chat as well. We have an announcement from Yash Shroff, our president.
Hello, everyone. I wanted to actually talk about something really, really exciting that's happening and driven with a really strong collaboration between SFP ACM and Anyscale. After many, many months of trying, we're actually putting together this really amazing workshop. It's called Ray Distributed. So for those of you who are in the area of data science, you may be aware that one of the biggest challenges is actually not just building amazing AI models, but actually deploying them at scale. There are many challenges around observability and, in fact, managing infrastructure and everything else around it. And one of the hottest areas of whether it's job profiles or looking at publishing papers. So in the entire spectrum, learning and understanding how the different pieces come together is now becoming a critical life skill in this field. As a result, this collaboration is really exciting for us, and we're happy to be able to present it to you. We have the sign up link over here. You can also use your phone and use that mobile QR code, or just go to bit.ly SFPACM dash Ray, which will take you to the Eventbrite page. Just for this event, we're actually so we're looking to get a good cohort together before the prices go up. So just for this event, we've actually gotten the prices significantly lower. So it gives you a $10 discount if you're signing up now. And the code that you want to use on Meetup on Eventbrite is ACM_Meetup. And the modules that are covered on the left-hand side of this foil are, day one is basically foundational, and there'll be a lot of, data science related discussions. The background that's needed is really more or less around knowledge of, building some neural networks, right? But not too much more than that. For all of that time, plus for some time even after the workshop, you will have access to the Anyscale infrastructure, which gives you access to GPUs for training and other things. So you could probably go ahead and create an amazing project that can be part of your showcase. So we'll cover Ray, we'll cover runtime, Ray core, and all the foundational libraries on day one. And then in day two, we'll actually go ahead and hopefully end with a small capstone project as well. So there'll be, both lecture-based content as well as time for running through some of the labs. And after this, much like what you would find in a university course, we'll have office hours with some people who'll be volunteering their time. Okay. So thank you so much for this opportunity to be able to bring this to you. We're hoping you can sign up and let us know if you have any questions. Alan, you're on.
I'm Alan Karp. I do have a Ph.D., but don't get too excited. It's in astronomy. I was an assistant professor at Dartmouth until I learned I was expected to spend all my time writing grant proposals. So I went over to the dark side and did 15 to life at IBM and 20 plus years at HP Labs. And I did a whole bunch of different things. I was one of the architects for the Itanium processor, which was not the disaster many of you think it is. I did some game theory, built an automated negotiation tool. I spent my last 10 years there doing usable security, making systems that were easier to use because we added security, not in spite of it, but because of it. I'm actually not ashamed of some of my 75 patents. So some of them are pretty ridiculous, but some are pretty useful. So that's who I am. Oops, let's go back. Go back. Okay. So today I want to talk about a different kind of password manager, SitePassword. Now, I've been to a bunch of these talks in this ACM series over the years, And I'll be frank with you, this is the least significant of any of them. On the other hand, it's the one you encounter most frequently, almost certainly daily. So now I expect the first clause up here reflects your opinion of passwords. And, you know, you have any idea who might have said this? Everyone says this. You have any idea when it was said? It's probably been said since the first day we used a password to connect to a computer. So what's wrong with passwords? Well, XKCD, as usual, says it best, right? Passwords are hard for people to remember, but easy for computers to guess. And so what do? We do things like write them down in a little booklet. This looks like a professionally produced booklet. I mean, somebody thought there was a market for a booklet for writing down your passwords. That's the extent of the problem. Now, normally what we do when we have a problem with computers is we use computers to solve the problem. And that's what we do with password managers. So people in the audience, people on Zoom can do it too. If somebody can see the audience and can tell me, raise your hand if you use a password manager. I'll tell the folks out there that only 3.5 hands went up. Shame on you for not using a password manager, first of all, okay? Keep your hand up. Now, lower your hand if you're happy with your password manager. Only 1 hand went down, 2 hands went down, okay? So I'd like to know from the people who are unhappy with their password managers, I'd really like to know what they're unhappy about. That would help a lot. So if you're unhappy with your password manager, there's plenty out there. You can change it. Some of them are free. Some of them cost a few bucks a month. Every once in a while, one goes out of business. But this is one of the top recommendations for security that is not followed. Fewer than half of people actually use a password manager. So what do we want from a password manager? Well, it's secure. I put it at the bottom because that's not really the thing that matters. You don't want your password manager to leak your passwords. Okay, that's kind of, well, duh, yeah. But the other things are ease of use. It's got to engender trust. And you got to be able to get your Netflix house when you're visiting your parents, right? So those are the things that you really need. But there are other desirable features. You want it to help you, if not force you, to use a different strong password for every site. And there are some password managers that will actually go out and automatically change your password for you every 3 months at all your sites. Now, that's not necessary. And by the way, for you who don't use password managers, I think that's actually a very bad idea. But it's too long a story, but I have a rant about why that's the case. What is a password manager anyway? I've been talking about it, but I haven't said what it is. Well, according to Malwarebytes, it's an application that will store your passwords. The US government says it's an app that will store your passwords. According to Consumer Reports, it's a service that will store your passwords. Sounds like a repeating theme here. I think we have a consensus. Password manager stores your passwords. What's the problem with that? Well, first thing is, where is it stored? On your machine? Or how are you going to get your password when you're at your friend's house? If it's stored in the cloud, whose cloud? I have a cloud. I expect some of you have a cloud. But my sister doesn't have a cloud, and I expect most of the users of these tools don't have a cloud. So it's probably going to be stored in their cloud. And then how are they stored? Well, encrypted, although there's an exception I'll bring up later in the talk. But who controls the key? If you control the key, what happens if you lose it? If they control the key, can you trust them not to lose it or abuse it? And then it costs money. Some of these password managers have 1 million or more users. That's managing that many accounts takes resources. In addition to paying for the cloud resources to store all the passwords. And then there's this to worry about. I got this email from LastPass in December. Somebody hacked them and got a hold of their password database. Now, to the best of my knowledge and their reporting, no user passwords leaked. But Bruce Schneier's most recent newsletter says that that security depends totally on the difficulty of guessing the master password. And a lot of people don't choose good master passwords. So apparently LastPass did not separately encrypt the whole database, which I think they should have done. But again, it's just something else to worry about. So how about looking at a different approach? Instead of remembering your passwords, let's calculate them. Now it can be free. SitePassword is free. There's a voluntary contribution. It doesn't go to me. It's free. It can be free because there's no accounts to manage. There's no password storage needed. I'm walking away from the machine and I bet my voice is fading. I'm gonna try.
It was pretty good.
Okay.
Here it through.
Good. Okay, good. Thank you. And in fact, because it's a purely local calculation, it can be done even without network access. And there may be times when you don't have network, but you still need to log in to some local app or something. So that's good. But the main point here is that you're in control. You can carry around a piece of paper with everything you need to get your passwords. And it's not great if you lose it, but it's not terrible. It's certainly not as terrible as losing that little notebook with all your internet passwords written down on. So that's the main. So I want to give you a brief history of the development of SitePassword, so you'll know for sure that the main ideas weren't even mine, but I stole them all. So the story starts in the early 2000s. I was working at HP Labs and I was getting sick and tired of trying to manage all my passwords. I hadn't started working in computer security yet, but I sort of knew that you needed good, strong passwords and you shouldn't reuse them. That basic kind of stuff, and it was really annoying. I had just learned about hash functions, and I said, ooh, now I have an idea. I can make one password that I have to remember, and only one, and an easy to remember nickname for every site. And then I'll just hash them together, and now I'll have a good password for the site, SitePassword. Right? And I wrote a little Python tool, and a colleague turned it into this Windows executable. And somebody else wrote a Java applet, and somebody else wrote one for the Palm Pilot and the Nokia phones and the Unix command line, and there were about a half a dozen different versions. Now I used it. I don't know about these other folks, but this was the way I dealt with my passwords. A couple of years later, people from the HP Atala division. Atala was a security company that HP had bought a year or two earlier. They had very close ties to the banking industry. And this was August, and they were presenting at a conference in January, a banking conference in January, and they wanted to say something about phishing. And they were kind of embarrassed that they didn't have anything to say. And they'd heard about SitePassword, and they asked us if we could turn it into a toolbar for Internet Explorer. Remember when everybody and his uncle was writing a toolbar for Internet Explorer, and yay much toolbar and this much screen to look at. That's what the world was like back then. So I turned to our intern, Ka-Ping Yi, and I said, Ping, how long will it take? And he said, a couple of weeks. He seemed really grumpy. And so after the meeting was over, I tracked him down and said, what's the matter, Ping? He said, you're treating me like a code monkey. I said, Ping, you're an intern. What do you think you are? 3 weeks later, he came back with this. Characteristic of Ka-Ping Yi, everything he does dramatically exceeds your expectations. He wanted a simple toolbar with the calculator. He gave us something where you have a field right there in the browser on the toolbar where you can fill in your nickname for the site. He had the good sense to add his username for you, because sometimes remembering your username is harder than remembering your password. This is pulled up once you filled it in the first time, it gets pulled up automatically every time you return to this page. So you don't have to even remember that much. It's got a button you click, and when you do, it automatically fills in your user ID and password. Ain't that grand? Ain't that grand? That's magic. They got a wonderful reception at the conference. Oops. Why is it? Why is my, oh, I'm pushing the wrong button. They got a wonderful response at the conference, and somebody pointed out that it met the FSMA requirements for two-factor authentication. One factor being the master password, and the second one was the local database that brought up the info. Because if you came back, if you were at a phishing site, that information wouldn't show up, and in fact, the little bar would be red, let you know that something was going on. Wonderful. HP released it as a product, the HP anti-phishing toolbar. The thing was free, but if Wells Fargo wanted to distribute it to its customers, they could pay HP $1 per seat to put their logo on the button. Right? That's a lot of money, right? Wells Fargo has millions of customers. I don't know that any bank actually did, but that was the business model. All right, well, time marched on, and people began to realize how incredibly insecure Internet Explorer is. And so they started migrating to other browsers. Now, most people went to Firefox. I really didn't have a choice. I had to go to Chrome because the Chrome people cited our research in their technical paper on the Chrome browser when it first came out. And so how could I not go to Chrome? And Chrome has a way of doing plugins that they call extensions. So I was between projects at labs, so I wrote an extension. And as you can see, I blatantly stole all of Ping's wonderful work, right? You got a form, you fill it out, remembers all the stuff, fills in the page. Wonderful. But it had some problems. It didn't synchronize across your machines. Now, most of the time that didn't matter because it was supposed to be an easy to remember nickname for the site. But sometimes there were other settings. Sometimes, somebody made me change a password, like the bank made me change the password. So the nickname wasn't what I thought it was at first. And so that was kind of it. I handled personas, but I wasn't happy with the way it did it. So what's a persona? So you may have a Facebook account at work and a Facebook account at home, and you'd like to use separate credentials. Or you got a shared machine at home and everybody uses the same Netflix login, but they want to use their own credentials for Instagram. Right? Those are personas. And I wasn't happy with the way that worked. And also, I only found the password field on about a little more than half the pages, which meant I was always opening up the pop-up and copying to the clipboard and just sort of not happy with it. So I put it in the Chrome store, but only for testers, and about a dozen people tested it and gave me feedback on it. But I don't think any of them actually used it. So for the next 10 years, I was the only user. And then 2021, the end of 2021, Google sent out a note, all you extension developers, you have to upgrade your extensions. And I said, okay. I'd been kicked out of labs. They decided they came to their senses and decided they didn't want me anymore. But I was working for a startup, a networking startup of all things. And it was in the process of folding about the time I got this notice from Google. I said, okay, I'll take a month or so, a couple of weeks, maybe a month, and I'll do the conversion, and then I'll find something else to do. And here it is a year later. And I just got the new version in the Chrome store this week. What took so long? Well, there were two pieces to that. The look and feel is dramatically improved. That wasn't my doing. That's Dale Schumacher, did a wonderful job. He even made code improvements to the web version I'll be telling you about. But the two main reasons were Google's changes and that I fixed what I didn't like. So in the original version, which was using something Google calls Manifest 2, just a piece of jargon, you had a persistent background page. This was a process that was just sitting there and it could remember things for you. SitePassword doesn't store your master password anywhere. It's just in the running process. So I had a background page and I could just remember your master password. Well, the new version, which they call Manifest 3, you don't have a background page. You have a transient service worker that can stop at any time. And when it stops, it forgets everything, loses its memory. And that meant I had to find another place to hold on to your site password so you didn't have to enter it every single. That was one problem. I found one, it's something called session storage, and it has the same security properties as the background page. So found that, I was happy with it. Then the second thing is, with Manifest 2, a lot of stuff was synchronous. And this is a simple thing, there's no reason to be asynchronous. It doesn't do anything of high latency. It never talks on the internet, for example. Works just fine. But in Manifest 3, almost anything you want to do is async. Now, I've done async programming. It's okay. It works, and I know my way around async, but I never converted a synchronous program to async. And I made more than my share of errors, mysterious things looking like race conditions, but just because I'd screwed up the async. That was a good part. But the other part was fixing what I didn't like. So finding the password field. That alone took me 6 months for reasons that I'll explain later. And on my 120 plus test sites, it always finds the password field. This is as good or better than some of the professional password managers that you find out there. There's one site that none of them get that I can. I'll explain why. But there may be others out there where I don't, hence the question. The second one is it synchronizes across your machines. Now, think about that. How are you going to synchronize across the machines without user access? Where am I going to put the data? Where am I going to store it? How am I going to know it's your data and not his? Right? So I fumbled around with that, played around. I actually, earlier, before this work, I tried to use Parse. If you know Parse, it was a back-endless kind of system. They provided the back end for you. And never happy with it. And the same thing with personas. I tried fixing the part of the personas work I didn't like, and finally gave up. And then it struck me: let Google do the heavy lifting, right? So I store your settings in bookmarks. Google synchronizes bookmarks. Every browser synchronizes. I don't have to worry about synchronizing across machines. Now it turns out, I don't know about the other browsers, but Google doesn't merge conflicts. And so I had to do a little bit of work, but it turns out the way I ended up, it's very easy for you to handle. I wouldn't know which version to pick, but it's easy for you to know. And so I made it easy for you. And then it turns out that Google has something called profiles. And those are personas. They're exactly personas. And every persona gets its own bookmarks. Ta-da! Google does the heavy lifting. So let me give you a little taste of what SitePassword is. I can do a demo later if you're interested. I've been using it for all my passwords. Even now I was developing it, I was using it for all my passwords. So you install the extension. You can see the, there's a little logo. I don't know, I chose a padlock because it had something to do with security and it was a free thing and there were no license restrictions. So that's why I chose that. I don't know what it has to do with passwords, but that's what it has to do. And when you come to the page, what you see is on the password field, it says click site password. So you click site password and you get the menu. And you fill out the menu. And while you're typing, this thing changes. I continually do the hashing as you're typing. I'll explain why later in the talk. But just notice T03X. It starts with that. Okay, that's the password you get. My password here, where it says don't use, that's a strength meter, is QWERTY, because I don't want to show you my real passwords, of course. Anyway, so you fill in the form, and when you mouse out, your username gets filled in, and it says click here for password. You click, and your password's there, you're ready to log in. Now comes the magic part. When you come back, all you have to do is click on the password field, and you log in. And that's true on any machine that syncs your bookmarks. So you only have to set up a given site once for all your machines that have the extension installed. Isn't that nice? Now, remember I said this came from an anti-phishing toolbar, so it's got an anti-phishing feature. If you try to use the same nickname, same site name, for a different site, you get a big scary warning. Is that a different site? Did you notice The previous slide, the domain name. On this slide, the domain name. Aha, you might be phished. Therefore, you get the big scary one. But if it's not phishing, and it often isn't, you can accept it and just say, you only get this once for a given domain. Okay. Sites have funny password rules, how many numbers, letters, uppercase, lowercase, special characters, even which special characters you may or may not use. So you have this menu here, this set of things that you can adjust to meet the password rules. Now, this came from the first version, and I tested it against the Alexa 250. That's the top 250 websites. And I was always able to compute a legal password, no matter what. And that includes the Palo Alto Utilities company that says exactly which special characters are acceptable and which are not. So, and then down here at the bottom, I'll use the pointer. I think that shows up on the screen. There's a thing that says download site data. Remember that piece of paper? If you click that button, you get a nicely formatted table with all your settings. You can print it out and carry it around in your wallet. Now, if you lose it, what did the bad guy learn? Bad guy learns where you log in and what your user ID is. And that's it. There's no clue about what your site password is, what your master password is. That's why it's a little security stuff, but not a lot, right? So you'd prefer not to lose it, but it's not like losing that room. And what if you're at your friend's house? There's a web page for that, SitePassword.info. If you're worried that I might not renew the domain name, you can go to alanhkarp.github.io/SitePassword. GitHub's going to last a lot longer than I will. So you same thing, and then notice you get the exact same password. But there's something else. If you're on a device that syncs your bookmarks but doesn't have SitePassword installed, like your phone, where you can't install an extension, you can actually paste in the bookmark, and it will fill in the settings for you. So that's a short walkthrough of SitePassword. Now, I mentioned two important things for your password manager: usability and security. So let's talk about usability first. Now, it turns out, in fact, that it's not just usability, it's usable security. And you won't have security unless your users understand the implications of their actions. That is an extremely important principle, but how do you go about doing it? Fortunately, there's Ping's 10 principles for a secure user experience. The same Ka-Ping Yi, who was grumpy about being a code monk. Now, not all of these apply to SitePassword, but some of them do. So path of least resistance, make the secure way the easy way. It is easier to log in with SitePassword than to type a weak password that you use everywhere. The secure way is the easy way. Explicit authorization. SitePassword will not put your password unless you click on that field. So you know exactly what you're doing. It's making you aware of the implications. SitePassword isn't all about granting privileges and maybe revoking them, but it's easy enough to forget the settings for a site. You just delete that bookmark. Gone. And then expressiveness, the only policy here really beyond are the password policies of the individual websites, and I showed you the menu that lets you do that. The slides are available, and you can just download them. And I have a reference to Ping's paper. I have my own code guidelines as well. Every tool I developed, I've developed half a dozen, maybe more, prototype tools that we tried out on actual users. And my goals are to make it as easy to use as Candy Crush. You didn't read a 40-page manual before you started playing. Some of us read the instructions. We won't go into it. it should be blindingly obvious what you should do. A good way to get there is to understand what happened here. Oh, no. A good way to understand that is to realize that a help button is a crutch for developers. I don't know if any of you are on development teams, but have you heard a developer say, "Oh, we'll just explain that in the help"? You take that away, and they will work very hard to make it clear what you should be doing. It's important that you let people experiment. When you got a new video game, you just played around with it to see what happened if you push this button or that button, looking for an Easter egg here or there, whatever. And that should be allowed. That should be encouraged. You want people to play with your user experience. You want to encourage good practices. You may not be able to enforce them, but you definitely want to encourage them. So you want to warn on weak or site or master passwords. You want to choose a readable font. That's a lesson I learned from that first version back in 2002. I don't know if you've ever had to log into Netflix on your smart TV with that awful on-screen keyboard. You don't want to have to do that multiple times because you can't distinguish a lowercase L from an uppercase I. So it's important to use a readable font. And then there are times when you want to let the user know what to do next. And there's a very easy way to do that. Focus on the field the user should be doing next. That easy. One of my gripes is I go log into a site and they text me a code and I type the 6 numbers. And then I look at the screen and they're not there because they didn't focus the damn fields for me. Come on, guys. I didn't completely succeed. There are places where I just couldn't do it, okay? So, the click here for password or click SitePassword, that's guidance for the user. That's important. It tells them immediately what's going on. And there are web pages where I cannot make it show up. I spent a week on one site trying to make that set. And not only couldn't I make it show up, I don't know why I couldn't make it show up. So that's a problem. I resorted to a tooltip, but in that case, you got to hold your mouse over the field for a second or two to get the tooltip to show up. So I'm not happy with it. I mentioned that you can forget the settings of a domain simply by deleting the bookmark, but how do you make that obvious? How do you make that so it's natural? I haven't figured that out. And then closing the pop-up. So you filled in the menu and you've moused over to the password field. Now I have 2 ways to close that pop-up. One is when it loses focus, when you click on something else. But now you got to click once to close the pop-up and once to insert the password. Yuck. So I changed it so it closes when you mouse out. Unfortunately, it's too easy to mouse out, and the mouse out event triggers sometimes when you're only close to the edge. Double yuck. So I came up with something I'm not entirely happy with, but it seems to work. When you mouse out, the window closes in 3/4 of a second. Not a half a second, not a second, 3/4 of a second. That gives you enough time to mouse back in. And if you do, I don't close the pop-up. But it's long enough, it's short enough that I'm hoping you won't get all the way to the password field and click before it closes, because otherwise you'll have to click twice. Hate heuristics, but that's it. All right, let's talk about the second piece of the puzzle, which is password manager security. First of all, mobile. The situation on mobile is dire. It is really, really terrible. You can have an app on your mobile device, your phone or your tablet, that can insert a password in another app. Sounds perfect. The problem is it's too easy to spoof the application identity. And you certainly don't want to be inserting your password for one app into another app. That's not a very good thing. There's also an additional problem on Android devices where you can spoof messages. So if you have one app asking another one for a password, you can spoof that it came from someone else and steal the password. The situation is bad enough that one password manager actually removed their app from the store from the Chrome store. There is a password manager built into all browsers. I don't know about all browsers, but all the commonly used browsers today. Certainly better than not using a password manager. They're really good in that they can always find the password field, so you never have to resort to the clipboard. Although there are times when you should resort to the clipboard that sometimes they don't when you should. But the literature I read, I didn't do the security analysis, but the papers I read says in general, they're not as secure as the standalone. Some don't generate passwords. They'll only store your weak and reduced passwords for you. And all of them that I know of allow you to do that. That's not very good. And a bunch of them don't worry about the password policy. So they assume you need special characters. They'll pick them. What if the Palo Alto Utilities doesn't like that special character? You can't use their generated password. So I'm not going to talk about the ones built into the browser anymore yet. So let's just talk about standalone password managers. Oh, before that, I want to talk about the Chrome password manager, Chrome browser password manager. I hope this isn't characteristic of all of them, because this is really, really bad. It autofills with no user action. That makes it easy to steal passwords. All the attacker needs is to find any page in the domain that's got a vulnerability, a cross-site scripting vulnerability, a bad certificate. And these pages, might be an FAQ or a contact us page. People who develop these pages don't even think about security. But if an attacker can inject the password field onto it, your password manager will fill it in as simply as can be. And the attacker's got your password. In fact, there's a more complex attack that can extract every password from your password manager in a few minutes if you have autofill with no user action. So that itself is a disaster. The Chrome browser password manager does it. There is a safe way to do it that is not available to developers. I verified that they don't do that. You can't customize the generated password. I mentioned that that's a problem. Here's one. The passwords are stored but not encrypted by default. And if you go to the place where it says encrypt your passwords, you get a big scary warning about why you might lose all your passwords if you forget the key. Now that is completely unnecessary. This is Chrome. You have logged into Chrome. They know who you are. They could use your Chrome login password to generate an encryption key, but they scare you away from it. It does warn you on weak passwords, but you have to explicitly ask to check. So you go to the password manager, you set up the password for a site, turns out to be weak, you go log in. You don't see any warning of it. Here's a good one. It is so, the way the browser works, there's two kinds of input fields. There's text and password. And text, you see what's in the field, and password you don't. And that little button you click to say, show me my password? It turns it from password to text. That's how we do it. But people sometimes use the password fields for things that aren't passwords. Your security question answers sometimes, or even other stuff. I've encountered pages where I didn't even know why they bought it. Worried about shoulder surfing some innocuous information. But what that means is, if you click there, if they insert your password there, even if because you click, they might not apply the right security to that field because they don't think it's a password. So filling that in automatically, even on a click, is a risk. So for SitePassword, I force you to paste your password if there are multiple passwords. Then you're not likely to paste your password in as the answer to what's your mother's maiden name. Right? That's the reason I did that. It uses the same password for smile.amazon.com and amazon.com. Now, doing that automatically, figuring out that you should use the same password for those two sites is extremely difficult. Extremely difficult. Why? Well, think about alan.hkarp.github.io. What if it was Alan with two L's? Somebody's phishing you, and you're going to use the same password because it's github.io, right? So that's very dangerous. Now, there is a smart way to do it, which is to use the TLS certificate to see who owns the site. Google won't give Chrome developers access to the TLS certificate, even to read it. I have no idea why. People have been asking it for it since 2012. It's still not available. At any rate, I thought they were really smart about this, but they don't use the same password automatically for amazon.co.uk. So whatever they're doing, it's some rather simple, straightforward algorithm. I don't know. And then password security is more than just the passwords. I already talked about autofill with no user action. But with storage security, we saw the LastPass where the password database got stolen. They didn't get the passwords, but maybe somebody used a weak master password and we didn't hear about it. And then it's important to communicate with the user. If the user has a weak password, you got to let them know. Otherwise, they are not aware of the implications of their actions. And sometimes a randomly generated password is weak. This password here, one of my sources is a Ph.D. thesis, and he generated hundreds of millions of passwords and then evaluated them for password strength. And this was one of many weak ones he came up with. At 1 million guesses per second, you can guess this password in about 10 seconds. Okay? So that's a weak password, and you want to be warned if that should happen. And then, should you warn on phishing sites? Well, wouldn't that be nice? Now, there's a downside to that I'll tell you about just shortly, but wouldn't that be nice? But there's also a phishing attack against your master password. What is to prevent an attacker from putting on a web page a form that looks just like your password manager login page? Ta-da! They got all your passwords. And then you have to worry about accessibility features. You don't want a screen reader reading your password out loud when you're sitting in a coffee shop. I actually had to add an option to SitePassword once I read about that. Duh. Yeah. And then there's code size. There's a very popular, with over 1 million users, a very popular password manager. It's over 250,000 lines of code. Now, we all know the more code you have, the more likely you are to have a vulnerability. So that's a risk in and of itself. SitePassword is 1% of that. That's a good thing. But there's something else, there's a lesson to learn from that. Remember, I told you it took me a year. So that works out to less than 10 lines of code per workday. So you might not want me on your team when you're in a crunch to get the next release out. But that's up to you to decide. But the worst thing you can do is not use a password manager because you don't trust it. And that is the #1 reason that people who start using a password manager give up on it. They lose trust in it. So a lot of what you're doing through the user experience is building that trust. So how did SitePassword do? Well, the good is require a click on the password field. I only register the code that puts the password in the field on visible password fields. Now, it turns out a lot of web pages, Dropbox at one point, I don't know if they still do, had 6 password fields on their login page. Because they had the login page, the sign up page, and the change password field, change password page. All those things were on the same page, just only the right ones were visible depending on what you were doing. But I only do it on a visible password field. That means a clickjacking attack where they put an invisible field and trick you into clicking on it. Nothing will happen because I haven't registered a callback because the field is invisible. If there's an iframe on the page, I have to use the domain name of the iframe, not the domain name of the page, obviously. I mean, it could be an ad from some completely different company with a login page, with a login form, right? So I have to do that. Unfortunately, that means you're going to see bookmarks that you never saw in the address bar. So I just hope that isn't too confusing for users. I haven't encountered any yet that are too confusing for users, but that doesn't mean somebody won't do it. There are, so when attackers steal a password database, those passwords aren't stored in the clear, they're not even stored encrypted. What you do is you hash the password and store that in the database. And then when the user logs in, they hash again, and then they'll look to see if the hash is matched. They don't have to store the password. So attackers started building what they're called rainbow tables. They'll do the hash of every combination of characters up to some size, 8 and 12 characters. I mean, these are terabyte tables. But now when they steal a hash for database, all they have to do is do a lookup to see what the corresponding password is. Now you defeat that by adding something called salt. So it's just something so that, you know, the hash of this password with the salt will be different. And so by combining the site name and username with your master password, that's salt for your master password. And it's up to the site you're logging into to provide salt for your site password. So that's good. And then there are times when you're going to use the clipboard, and it's dangerous to leave up security critical information on the clipboard because any app can read it. So I actually warn you if you put your password on the clipboard. And then there are some things that I gave up that security people recommend, but I gave up for a good reason. So I put the settings in bookmarks, which means your settings are not encrypted. That means an attacker who can get your bookmarks will know where you log in and what's on that piece of paper. Okay, it's not real critical, but it's something you would like. You're not going to advertise it. You're not going to put it on the building. It turns out it's really hard to get to the bookmarks from a web page. You need a vulnerability in the browser. But your bookmarks are stored on your disk, and they're stored in the Google file. Now, if you've got malware on your machine, the bad guys can get your metadata settings. But if you got malware on your machine, you got bigger problems than losing your settings. And if Google gets hacked, well, life as we know it ends. So that's not a real concern. I made the site password visible by default because as you're typing, it changes and it gives you a real sense of how strong these passwords look. This is part of building trust. And I mentioned the issue with the pop-up, and this applies here as well. You don't often open the pop-up. Basically, you only open up the pop-up to set up a new site, or when you start a new browser session, you have to enter your master password. So I figured that's not too big. And I chose a 12-character password by default. It turns out when I did that because on the first version, a lot of the test sites did not accept longer passwords. I think it's still a reasonable default. It's easy enough for you to change it. You can't change the default, but it's easy enough for you to change if you're interested. But there's ugly. So there are two ways to guess passwords. One is to go to the website, put in what you think is the user's user ID. It's usually an email address or your name. And then just start guessing passwords and see if the login succeeds. That's nothing to worry about. It's hard to do more than 10 guesses a second just because of the internet round trip, and the site is probably going to detect the attack and lock the account. So it's a good denial of service. If you want to mess with your friends, you can do that, but it's not a real threat. The real threat is an offline attack where the attacker gets some piece of information and then starts guessing passwords. Like that LastPass database, they can start guessing master passwords and do that purely locally as fast as they want, right? On a local machine, and nobody knows it's happening. So there is an offline attack against your master password. Here's how it works. You'll log into a bad guy's site. The bad guy knows your user ID and your site password and can probably guess your nickname for the site, right? It just starts guessing master passwords. But there are mitigations for that. So, a strong master password. I am using a tool, I'll tell you later, that says a 12-character password, almost independent of what character set you use, as long as it's random enough, would take 30 days to guess at 1 million guesses a second, which is faster than even most of these attackers work. They work in the tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands. So that's pretty good. But SitePassword hashes 100 times before it gives you your site password, which means the attacker has to do 100 times as much work, and that turns 30 days into 30 years. So it takes 30 years to guess one of these 12, a 12-character master password. But you can do better than that. There's no reason you have to have only one master password. You could use one master password for banking, health, things that you consider really important. Another master password for subscriptions, a third one for sketchy sites like the bad guys. So he's going to spend all that effort. He's going to get your master password and it won't get anything to your bank. So those are the reasons. One of the things I really miss about being in the office is standing around the coffee machine listening to war stories. This is the weird stuff that people encounter and all the contortions they have to go through to work around. So I hope you enjoy it. Finding the password field. Remember, I told you it took 6 months. These websites do some really crazy stuff, to be polite. So, as I mentioned, they often put it in an iframe with a different domain name than the page you're on. They do that for convenience. It's not necessary. And in fact, they suffer for it because they have the cross-domain problem. And then they go through the contortions to deal with that. But they do it, and it's a nuisance. That was the main reason the original version, the 2012 version, didn't find password fields, because it wasn't looking at iframes. Some of them add not just the password field dynamically, but the whole page dynamically. If you go do a view source, you'll see a dozen lines. What they're doing is downloading hundreds of thousands of lines for the actual website. Now, the good news there is there's something that I can use called Mutation Observer that tells me every time the page changes, and I can see if they just added a password. Then there are the sites that add the password field with type text and then change it to type password. That's not considered a mutation. I got to work especially hard in that case. I mentioned the case of many passwords on the field, password fields on, but only one visible. But some of them are invisible in an odd way, like one of them was 5,000 pixels to the left, right? Or another one is sitting behind some other element, right? So you have to figure out if it's visible, which one of them is visible. A bunch of sites actually only make the password visible after you click on a button. So they say, enter your user ID, and you click on the button. Now, I know why they're doing it, and it's a very bad reason. The reason they're doing it is if you don't enter a valid user ID, they won't show you the password. But now when hackers start guessing user IDs until they find a legitimate one. So it's a crazy thing to do, but they do. Others are download CSS, cascading style sheets that change the style. That will make an invisible field, password field visible. You have to watch for that. That's not a mutation because it's downloading code, so I have to have a special. Other sites will change the password, the login form, the password fields, based on the fragment. That's the stuff after the hash sign. Now, I know why they're doing it. They want to customize the form depending on where you came from. So it's not a bad idea, but it's something that I have to look for. The problem is that doesn't take effect until after the page is finished loading. So I have to continue to look even after the page. Have any of you ever heard of a shadow root or a shadow DOM? I had not. This blew my mind. A shadow root is a completely separate document embedded in another one, and the two are completely isolated from each other. And it is such a wonderful idea. I asked somebody who really knows about browsers why it's not used everywhere. And he says, because the design is so bad, it's broken. But I found a site that uses puts the password from the login form in a shadow. There is one site, a bank, they shall remain nameless because I'm ready to burn the building down. I fill in the username, and if you click on the password field fast enough, 2 seconds after the page finishes loading, they clear it. And I have to go back and put my stuff in it. Why would anybody do that? Drives me crazy. And then a silly one. It's unlikely that you'll go to the SitePassword.info webpage when you have the extension installed. But if you do, the password field shouldn't say click SitePassword. So I had to have one special case in my. So, is it visible? I mentioned some of the difficulty. There is something called window.computed style that will tell you if it's visible. And it works most of the time, but not all of the time. Sometimes you have to check this thing called an offset parent. Why they call it an offset parent? That basically means if you're embedded in something that's not visible, you're not visible. That's basically what it means. But there's a condition that you have to check. And it wasn't on the screen of documentation I was looking at. And so I'm sitting there struggling. Why is this thing not working? Why is this thing not working? And I accidentally scrolled the screen and I saw the condition. So lesson to me, read the documentation. Don't stop at the bottom of the screen. And then there's this clickjacking attack I mentioned. And there's a gazillion different ways to put an invisible element on the page. But the most common one used is just set opacity equals 0 or to a very small number. Now, there's no legitimate reason why a password field should have its opacity set at all. So I have a test for that. All right, I found the password field. Now, where's the user ID field? Well, there's a simple heuristic that's used by all the browsers, all the password managers, at least the ones that I could understand what they were doing. It's the field immediately before the password field, except when it's not. So sometimes it's to the left. Fortunately, that counts as before in terms of the document object model. So that was good. But I don't know if right to left languages, it will be to the right. I haven't done any internationalization, but I don't know the answer to that. Sometimes there are intervening input fields. Usually they're invisible. So I had a test to see is the intervening field. And out of my 120 plus sites, it gets it right every time except AmericanAirlines.com. Now, there are other password managers that get it right. I haven't figured out how they do it. There are some that don't, but there are some that do. I haven't figured out. But I'm just going to leave that. You have to figure that out. And then there is absolutely insane stuff. Stuff you would never imagine. I mean, you might think that your corner bagel shop hired, the neighbor kid to write the website. The kid didn't know what she was doing, and she, did this crazy. But this is big banks, investment houses, big merchants doing all this crazy stuff. So one bank has different domain names for the same login page. Securo7.bank.com, Securo1.bank.com. I've gotten up to Securo7.bank.com. Each one of those, you're going to get the phishing warning because I can't tell if it's legit or a phishing. The login form is at a completely different domain. I call this training you to be phished. I go to my health insurance company and they say log in, and I see a login form at a completely different URL. Completely different domain name. It's got nothing to do with the health insurance company, right? That's just training you to be phished. And I have to worry because now you're going to see a bookmark. And how the hell are you going to know what that is? There's a rule in HTML that the ID attribute has to be unique on the page. Great. Don't rely on it. A major bank has the password and username field with the same ID. Cost me 2 days because I had to change the way I was keeping track of the password. These companies go to enormous effort to improve the performance of their web pages. And then if you turn on the console and look, there'll be anywhere from 2 to 200 errors, which all affect the load. There was one example. I haven't been naming too many names, but I will say, because of who's hosting this event, myacm.acm.com was doing 4 sequential bad gets, which meant the page didn't finish loading for 30 seconds. Now, they didn't see it because they weren't showing you anything dynamic on the page, but I couldn't put your user ID in until the page finished loading. And so it looked like something was wrong. And I had a code around that. They've since changed to a completely different way of doing it. But that was really neat. So it is so bad that one of the password managers I looked at, and because it's JavaScript, you can see the source, even of the closed source. They had special cases for over 200 websites, and I bet they have people sitting there watching those websites in case they change. That's how bad it is. All right, so let me summarize. I have some more work to do. I would love to do user studies, but as an individual, there's no way I can do that. So I'm going to ask you folks if you would try it out, give me your feedback. You don't even have to use it to log in because you'll have to change all your passwords, but just try it out and tell me what you like and don't like. Compare it to your password manager. I would love to get a security view, but it's beyond any reasonable amount of money I could afford. So that ain't going to happen. But if you're interested in helping, that would be great. I want to make it work on other browsers. It already works on Chromium browsers. I didn't do extensive testing, but it seems to work on Brave, Edge, and Opera. I have to do more testing. It should work on Firefox. That's a Chromium browser, but Firefox likes to go their own way, and they've made some changes. According to the documentation, it should work. I'm not doing anything they say won't work, but it doesn't work. And then Safari. I have a hate-hate relationship with Xcode. For Safari, you have to use Xcode because they do all this stuff under the covers that they don't tell you about. And every time I start working on a project in Xcode, I do something that screws it up so badly, I have to start over. So that's just on me. I've got to figure it out. And I'm not going to do anything about mobile until they fix those security. So here are the references. Ping's 10 principles. I highly recommend this thesis if you're interested in the topic at all. It's a quite recent, very thorough overview of password managers. He's got a shorter paper, and these other papers also discuss some of the issues I've talked about. So your takeaways. Use a password manager. A bad one is better than none at all. My son uses the Chrome browser password manager, and I haven't told him he has to change. He's 36, he's on his own. I said, it's not the best, but better than not using it. But you should turn off any setting that autofills without user action. You can't do that with the Chrome browser. It automatically fills it in, but you should turn that off. Prepare for the worst. Sometimes these guys go out of business. So learn how to extract your passwords, or you're going to be in deep doo-doo when they shut down. And then use it wisely. Use strong passwords, different ones for every site, even if they don't force you to. Of course, your alternative then is to just take control and use SitePassword. So thank you. Take questions. I'm going to now lean on. Any questions here? Yeah, go ahead.
So I have a couple of questions, but just let me be straightforward. So SitePassword is right now available as a Chrome extension. It does not work with Safari yet, I'm guessing. Okay, and not on mobile. Do you have plans to kind of do that, even though you have a hated relationship with?
No, I'll get it working on Safari. It's just something I have to do. Right.
That's really awesome. And then if you can, I know you went through this portion on versus Chrome passwords. What about versus 1Password or versus LastPass?
Right.
Where do you stand out, and where are they kind of advantageous?
Yeah, so the big difference is they store your passwords and SitePassword calculates them. So you have to pay them money. They have professional UI designers and professional security experts that really know their stuff. Of course, they can still get hacked, as we've seen, but they do serious work, and they're very good, and I highly recommend them if you want to store your passwords. So go ahead and use them. They're quite good. So. But as I said, if your password database gets hacked, your security depends on the strength of your master password, because there's an offline guessing attack. So you got to take that into consideration. With SitePassword, you could choose not to use your banking password at a site you're suspicious of, your master password. And so there you can be completely safe. But this is a decision. I actually think SitePassword is easier to use because I just click on the field. Some of them you have to click twice, once to bring up a little menu and once to select what you want to insert. Now, some of them do a better job detecting that this really isn't a phishing attack. And I haven't figured out how they do it, or I would be doing it. Okay, another, you want to follow?
Yeah, it's a quick one. I know you mentioned about this last password. It's an interesting case.
Well, one password also got hacked a few years ago.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay. But a different method of attack. I'm
Yeah,
guessing,
yeah.
Otherwise, last password copy. So when they
Oh, no, it was actually both. They phished some guy with local credentials, in both cases.
So
80% of these hacks start with a phishing attack or a spear phishing attack.
so again, so that could still happen again.
Yeah.
Because it's just
So just use a really strong master password.
they're phishing the employee.
Phishing the employees, yeah. So just use a really strong master password to be safe.
So I had a simple like workout. So LastPass, for instance, got hacked and they're going to work offline on it, say for 10 years, so they can get something out. And then they can see this tranche of data that they got out.
Mhm.
And after 10 years, they can see your 200 passwords.
Right.
Correct?
Who cares?
Because they got the master password and they can see it. Couldn't LastPass have, and I know it's a big ask, encrypted your actual password with your master password and maybe some other salt with time of day or something, right? So even if a third party could actually get access to your master password, they still need.
They have to store the password so you can get it and copy it manually if you have to. And so they can't get away with just storing a hash. They have to actually store the real password. It's not like, logging into a machine and your site password, that they can use just a hash. But there are times when you have to take the password out and put it on the clipboard. And that means they need to store the actual password. So, but what they should do is encrypt their whole database with a separate encryption key that they carefully control. And there are ways to do that.
And they didn't do it because of compute
According to,
costs?
I thought they had based on their explanation, but according to Bruce Schneier, that's not the case. I'm not the expert who can tell. So, question?
Yeah, so might be that you touched on that, and I probably didn't pay attention. You say that you are calculating the password, right? How do you deal with places where the trace is the same, the user is the same, and you need to change it every 3 or 6
You
months?
just change your nickname. So remember you have a site name?
Yeah.
Right? So my site name was Guru, my still sample case,
Okay.
right? I changed it to Guru 2 or Guru 2020. Now I get a completely different password because it's a hash.
The nickname, so the nickname is part of the bookmark?
Yeah, that's stored. That's part of the setting. What it remembers is your nickname for the site, your user ID, and all those settings for the rules, the password rules.
I see. So the nickname is part of the, not something that you put in the transaction, it's just part of what you put.
That's right. And so you change one character, you're getting a completely different site password.
One more thing,
Mhm.
that's a suggestion. I heard from somebody, I think it's a good one, for the dark website. I mean, for the dark web where the passwords get exchanged and traded, a good usage is to put a comma inside your password. And for everybody that deals with comma separated values, you mess them up.
Yeah. Unfortunately, the attackers know that trick. The dark
But
web.
yeah, but it's
No,
good suggestion.
anything you can do. But what we're doing here is we're saying you can use all kinds of different specialties. Backslash is another really good one. Sorry.
That's true.
But many websites don't accept those things because they're using comma separated.
Even comma.
Right. So and I'm using this password calculator strength meter from Dropbox called ZXCDN, VCDN, and it's really good. SitePassword itself is a couple hundred kilobytes, but I'm using this tool has 100 megabyte of words that weaken passwords. So if you have a 12-character random password, one of them happens to be a woman's name, 4 characters, Joan, right? That will weaken the password, and they will tell you that it's weakened the password. So I'm using that as the password strength meter. And it turns out I did some experiments that adding special characters to a 12-character password doesn't increase their strength only marginally. Because it's so long that a brute force guessing attack is just going to take too long. And then the 30 days goes to 30 years. That gives you extra protection. Any other questions online?
I don't see any other questions.
Yeah.
So, what is your preferred environment to design, develop, and debug?
Yeah, and test is the big
And
one.
techniques.
And test is the big one. So I am doing all my development in VS Code. It is, to me, a wonderful environment. I spent 6 years at the startup doing Rust. And the integration, the Rust analyzer in VS Code is magic. It's really terrific. I became quite familiar with VS Code. It's free. I like free. Type 1. I use the on the web page. I just use the Chrome developer tools, the debugger. For debugging your extension, I'm using the Google tools. There's a thing where you can, they call it examine background page or whatever it is, service worker, and so I use that. The hard part is test, and you can single step and print out. And one technique I learned a long time ago is have a gazillions of logging statements and an if test to turn them off. So I have a little one variable I change, and then I can turn the logging on and off. And that helps a lot. And especially on a web page, because some things happen before the debugger starts. And the only way to know that what they did is to print them up to the console. So that's what I'm using there. The real problem is I like test-driven development. I like having 3 times as much test code as I have application code. But I don't know how to do that for a Chrome extension. I don't know how to automate testing a Chrome extension. When I make a change, I go through 120 plus websites to test it. And that's why it's version 1.01 out there and not version 1.0, because I made a stupid mistake the first time that I uploaded. I didn't run one of my tests because I just got lazy. So, by the way, it's not, if you search the store, you won't find it. You'll have to contact me because I don't want to release it until I get more user feedback. For example, one of my first other users uses the browser autofill. And the browser autofill gives you a window that shows you your user ID. So you try to get that to fill it in and it goes away. And it was very annoying. And I wouldn't have known that if he hadn't told me. By the way, I couldn't figure out a way to work that. Okay, here's a question.
There is a external question here asking to put up the URL again for the slides.
Oh, yeah.
And we can also put that URL in the comments on Meetup.
Right. Yep. And if you are willing to try it out, especially if you're willing to give me feedback, contact me and I'll give you the URL and you can share that URL. There's 2 ways to put it in the store for testing. One, only trusted testers, and one for anybody who knows the URL. I'm really interested in getting feedback from non-technical people because I worked very hard to make it as easy to use as possible so that you need to know as little as possible to get the best result. And I want to know how well or how poorly I did. Yeah.
Part of the allure of these other password sites is essentially network effects.
Yes.
My case as well, right? So you have a password, you want to share it with your wife because it's in banking, whatever it is. So, and then sometimes, your work laptop doesn't share a profile with a laptop and whatnot, right? So Google profile is your common go-to mechanism.
No, Google profile is the way I handle different personas. So if you want to share with your wife, you set up a persona for sharing with your wife. It'll have its own bookmarks and then you can share a master password. Because you share more than one password with it, presumably, right? So you'd use the personas, but the bookmarks are synchronized. So I use the bookmarks for synchronization and persona and profiles for personas.
cumbersome though, you think?
I-
To switch between profiles as you do your own?
No, my Mac won't let me set up a second profile. But I went to Edge on my Windows box and it will. And you can switch profiles without logging off. And you get your own set of extensions and your own bookmarks. And I believe your master password doesn't cross over when you switch profiles.
From itself on the Mac and
Yeah, but not on my Mac.
oh,
My Mac, I don't get the option add user, add profile. It just doesn't show up on the menu. Yeah,
in Mac.
on Chrome, it doesn't show up on the menu. There's a whole discussion list of dozens of people who have the same problem.
So concretely though, you were saying you can have multiple master passwords.
Yes,
Just share a master password with your wife. Agree that the nickname for a site is the obvious nickname for a site. Amazon is Amazon. And then you'd be in.
that would work too.
Dr. Karp, someone's asking how they can get in touch with you.
Alan H Karp at gmail.com with one L. Remember the phishing site.
alanhkarp@gmail.com.
You can put it in the chat. I'm old school. Here's a business card.
Okay, thank you.
I'll shoot one more question.
Yeah, sure.
This is phenomenal and amazing amount of work, and I don't think I would have done more. It doesn't have all this structure you all have. For all this work that you've done maybe for a couple of decades now, do you have any plans for monetization?
No, I have enough. I'm at an age. I'm unlike Musk and Bezos and those guys. I have enough. I don't need more. There is a way to make a voluntary contribution. There's a button you can click that will give you instructions. I didn't completely get away from the help menu. But at the bottom, it says voluntary contribution. And it is to the Internet Archive or your favorite charity. It's open source. The licensing will allow you to put your own branding on it and make money from it. Please be my guest. It's community commons, but community commons. But
So this is your full-time gig now? Or just you work on
well,
it, or-
yeah, I thought the startup I was working on was shutting down, so I figured I'd do this for a couple of weeks, maybe a month. I've had great fun. I've learned an enormous amount about front-end programming. I have a lot of respect for front-end programmers now.
And you don't want to kill yourself for having to work in JavaScript?
Well, I prefer strongly typed languages, so I like Rust a lot. I consider after 4 years of Rust, I consider myself an advanced beginner. So, no, I'm a great fan of strongly typed hacker languages. So, this was great fun. I learned a lot through my career. I've completely changed what I've done every 5 or 6 years, just because I like learning new stuff. I mean, we started working this networking startup. I knew nothing about networking. Now I know a good bit about networking.
So astronomy is no longer the cards?
Yeah, I don't do any more astronomy, but every time I come across a paper where they don't cite my work and they should, I let them know.
Awesome.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
One thing in chat. One thing in chat.
Yeah.
Here. Okay, no, I was looking to see if it was a question, but no,
Okay.
just more thank yous.
Okay. Yeah.
All right, I'm going to end the meeting now.
Saw you, but 33 years.